Join us every weeknight at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. The Intrepid radio program, a Scotty Roberts Productions broadcast.
Well, good evening, everyone. Happy Monday night. This is Scotty Roberts. This is the Intrepid radio program. Welcome, everybody. All those of you who are starting to gather in the chat room, those of you in other venues where this is showing, thanks for being here. Be sure to come on over to the YouTube if you would like to see the chat room and participate in it. You can comment on all the other channels like Facebook channels, Instagram, others, and I will see them, but nobody else will see them that chats in the show. So come on over. Be good to have you here tonight. And let's see, what else do I have to say? It is Monday. We did not broadcast all last week, and we talked about that a bit on yesterday's show, Sunday morning. If you're new here, we broadcast Monday, Wednesday, Friday with this show at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. And Sundays at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. So you are all welcome to join us. And let's see, what's it say? Live viewer comments show up. Oh, okay, that's all it is. Just a message from StreamYard. So welcome. I'm glad to have you here tonight. I want to start with some things that we have done in the past, and I'm trying to see where I put it. Here it is. It's tucked under. I've got a big screened computer. And it sits on its own stand, you know, one of those kind of the L-shaped stand. Some of my things slide under there. Before we really get going, I want to pick up an old habit that we've had, and that is starting with Spark Courage, 50 Ways to Be Bold, a little extemporaneous look at one of these matchsticks that's in here, faux matchstick, and they've all got messages written on them that give you really kind of ways to assert your boldness. And without my glasses on, I can't read that. I'm going to hold that up to there and see if I can read it better. Let's see. It says, make the first move. Okay. How can you be bold? This one says, here's one way. Make the first move. Be the one who I was going to say instigates, but maybe that would be fitting too, but who initiates. You get out there. You are the one who makes things happen. You're the one who makes things go. For me, many times, I got to tell you, 99 out of 100 times, nobody gets the going for you. You have to do that yourself. You have to be the one that's out there doing it. There's also this thing when we get into interpersonal relationships, this whole thing of forgiving or not being offended, which we talk about on this show quite a bit. I used to say to the youth group when I was a youth pastor years and years ago, we're talking 40 years ago. That's scary enough. But I used to tell these kids, hey, if you are the one who is offended, be the first to go to the other person. If you are the one who has done the offending, be the first to go to the other person. So the idea is don't let any grass grow and don't go slow about doing the things that you need to do to be the one who initiates forgiveness, who initiates settling matters, solutions, things like that. And also, as this says, be the first to make a move. Be the one to make a move with your career, your relationship, all these other things that you can think of in your life that are the things that we need to be the first to do. Be the first to do them. And this is one of the things that is in this pack that says these are one of the ideas that help make you bold. It builds your boldness. It builds your confidence. And so be the one. And don't let, the way I see this is, how many times do we get out there and we're so afraid of what the other person's going to think? We're so afraid of what we're going to do. We're so afraid of how to approach things. So worried about what somebody is going to say. Don't worry about that. Be the one to make your move. Have your ideas, put feet to your ideas, and move forward. Be the one to do that. Don't let somebody do that for you. Now, that doesn't mean we don't from time to time have people who will come along and will encourage us or help us to say, hey, I got this opportunity for you, but you still have to be the one to make the move and make things go. I was looking for my other one, my affirmators, but I don't know where I put that. I don't see it. It's on my not so messy desk because I just recently moved things around here, but I don't see it. So we won't worry about that unless it's underneath, way underneath. Nah, I don't see it. It's okay. We'll skip it for tonight. So how is everybody? How are things going? What are you up to? What's going on? I see many more of you out there than are in the chat room. If you want to come into the chat room, come on in. You can talk or you can stay where you are. Just listen and watch. I will say this. This video simulcast of my show is probably not the most exciting thing to watch. You're just watching me talk. So hopefully you can enjoy the messaging. You can enjoy the words. You can go over to the chat room and read the chats and participate. Hey, Randall Flagg, good to see you over there in the chat room. Nice to have you tonight. And so come on over and enjoy it either way. And if you're over in the Instagram channel, it's good to have you over there. Glad to have you showing up. And if you're over on Facebook or some of the other places where the show, our Patreon, you can see this show going on over there. And again, you can comment in all those places. But if you want to join the chat, come on over here to the YouTube channel, and you can enjoy that. Now, I have chosen a topic for tonight. I saw Professor Bauer had a topic on, I believe it was last night. They were talking about ancient amnesia, the things about our past that we've forgotten, the things on an esoteric level, and talking about awakening. I did not get a chance to listen to the show last night, but I thought, that's an interesting theme. I've talked about that before. I would love to have seen what he had to say about it and his guest. But I started thinking, should I look into a topic like that? And I stumbled across some really good stuff about Jesus. Now, most of you who are regular listeners to this show, you know where I stand on those things, but I will restate it in brief, is that you all know I got my start in Bible college. I went to theological seminary. I was in a Baptist conservative fundamentalist setting. I worked as a youth pastor during my time when I was in seminary. And hey, Van, drop the link. Which link you talking about? The link for the chat room? Or to call in? I can give you that. Let's see. Let me look for it. It's the invite link. I'll copy it here. I may not take your call right away, so hang on. There it is. There is the link to call into the show. And when I was in seminary, I worked as a youth pastor. And at the time, I wasn't paid for it. So I had to work a job alongside it. Then I moved out of state, and I ended up going into advertising. I didn't finish my seminary degree. I went into advertising, worked as a youth pastor for many years, again in that unpaid capacity for a church that really couldn't afford to have a youth pastor, or they weren't sure what my credentials were since I hadn't finished seminary. But I worked with the kids. And when I was moving from Detroit back to Minneapolis back in 1992, that's how long ago that was, 32 years ago, I was invited by that church to come on full time and be the youth pastor. And they said that they would counter anything I was doing. I was starting up my own company up here. And I turned it down. I said I would love to, but I'm going to go start my company back home. That was when my twin daughters were born, too, that year. And I wanted to bring them back. I didn't want to raise them in Detroit. No offense if you're listening from Detroit. I did not enjoy Detroit. I did not like Detroit, other than the people and the friends of mine who were there, the companies I was with. But I did not like the area. I didn't like living there. So I opted to come back home to the Minneapolis area. So my background is one of having worked with youth, worked in ministry. And, I processed over the next 20 years. I drifted further and further away from the core of the politics of my faith. I didn't throw out the baby with the bathwater, as I have said before on this show, but I did have a problem with some of the ways that things were being run, the interpretations of things. Let's see, Scotty, do you leave Quick Trip off of the resume? Yes, I do. I could put it on there. Elvis, I was at Quick Trip for all of about 5 weeks, maybe 4 to 5 weeks, longer than Kamala Harris was serving French fries at McDonald's. And I had one of my clients that had a big project that would have paid me the equivalent of about what I would have made a Quick Trip in 4 to 6 months. And I said, you know what? This is for the birds. I'm going to go do this. Not that I didn't have a good attitude. I brought my own attitude. I made people's day. I practiced the art of being there and never complained. I was always outgoing. The same person you see here on this radio show is the person I was at Quick Trip, and the way I've always been. But it was a thing that I said, this is not a vocation for me. It was something to bring in some dollars when the revenue stream was waning a bit. And I quit at Quick Trip a year ago, July. So it was a year. Can you believe that much time has passed? It was a year and a half ago that I finished up and was done at Quick Trip after my 4 to 5 week stint there. So July of 2023, I was no longer there. I did not like Quick Trip. I did not. Again, not the people. The organization was great. The pay, very typically low average. It wasn't that bad. I think I was making, I got to say, I think it was making $19.50 an hour. Something like that, which is not great pay. Because sometimes, the way I would look at it was, I can take on a logo project and in 4 to 5 hours make $650. Or I could make in a day more than I'd make at Quick Trip in a month, depending on what the project was. The problem I was facing at the time was those projects weren't coming in the door. So, and it's still a little shaky. That revenue stream is a little bit of a roller coaster these days. So I'm still working hard at, here I am. When I get old, losing my hair many years from now, or many years ago, will you still be sending me Valentines, Easter greetings, bottle of wine? La 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 la. I don't remember the words there. Will you lock the door? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64? which for me is coming in about 6 days. I will be 64. And I'm still working. The whole point with that, still working. The only way I'll retire is if somebody buys up one of my properties, my intellectual properties, and makes something out of it. We'll see. We still got irons in the fire out there. So we had to see. You had to buy your own shirt. Yeah, I did. I had to buy my own shirt. That was nuts. Well, I take that back. They gave you a, I don't want to misquote Quick Trip rules. I think they gave you like $35 or something like that to buy one of their little golf shirt things with the logo on it, or a shirt. And somebody had actually ordered one of the long sleeve dress shirts, the button down blue with the logo on it. And it was sitting in back, and they said, nobody's taken this. Is this your size? Sure enough, it was. So I took it, and I still have it. Don't wear it that much. But yeah, that's the way all those organizations are. So I'm glad I'm not working there. It's funny because the justification I used was I can work. I think they were working me 32 hours a week. I wasn't 40 hours a week, but they were working me 32 hours, I believe, a week. And in that 32 hours times, let's round it off to 20. $20 an hour times 30 hours. What is that? That's $600 a week before taxes. And I could say in a week, takes me a week at 30 plus hours to make $600, the same amount I can make in 4 hours doing work at home. The problem is though, even after doing this, ever since I've known Rainey, I've been doing the freelance gig. It wasn't producing. The last couple of years was really rough. And I have talked about this before. Some of it is the advent of AI and kids all over the world wanting to vie for the American dollar. So where I would charge, say, $650 to do a logo, so I can do that for $8 because they weren't using the money to live on. They just wanted American dollars and they wanted to get their name out there and so on. So, that's the kind of thing that was going on. So all of that aside, pushing that aside, yes, I'm no longer a Quick Trip. But I started off in ministry. I went into, when I was in my seminary days, I was selling men's clothing at one of the most posh men's suit stores in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, Cedric's, it was called. And, that's where back in the early 1980s, we were selling $2,500 suits for men. And, of course, all the accoutrement to go with that, the shirts, the ties, the pocket silks, all of that stuff. Suffice it to say, I was one of the only seminary students, which are usually broke guys wearing tennis shoes with a ratty suit coat or sport coat they picked up at the Goodwill and a couple of ties, because none of them make any money. They're on missions from God. And I was the only one wearing a $1,500 Brioni or Corneliani suit and tie. Now, I only had a couple of those. The neat thing, I'll tell you this little anecdotal story before I get into tonight's topic. When I worked at Cedric's while I was in seminary, there was a guy that bought a bunch of suits, had them all tailored, and then didn't like them, any of them. Rich dude. Rich dudes can do this. He just threw it all back. I'm not taking any of it. And they hung in the back room. And I was looking at those suits, and I noticed they were all my size. At the time, I was a 42 regular in my suit. And so I said, I would like to, what would it take for me to get these suits? I said, they're already paid for. They said, just take them. And so I had, the only thing I had to do was my arms were a little longer. So they had to do a little cuff work here, pant leg work. And I had 3 beautiful Italian suits that were all in excess of $1,500 in the early 1980s while I was going to seminary. So that was kind of fun. But AI is ruining my business. Elvis, it can. I do some AI. The AI I do is usually AI that is commercial. If I've got a commercial project to do and I have, and they have a low budget, I usually could take and do that project and I'd say, look, let's take a logo, for instance. That I might say it's $650 for a logo. And they go, wow, I've only got $150. I say, look, I'll do it for you, but it's going to be quick and dirty and no changes. And I would usually create something in AI for that. So that kind of thing. How you doing back there? What's up? There's Ellie. Hi. He says, she comes on like she's all bashful or something. She ain't. So say your highs and then your goodbyes.
Can I sing a song?
No, because I'm going to be doing my radio
just like
show.
A little part.
Nope.
But you're on your captain's cabin.
Yeah, no, that's just the logo for Captain's Cabin.
Really quick, just a little part.
Really quick. Up, your time's up. Quick. Quick means now. Make it so.
Written on these walls are the stories that I can't explain. Leave my heart open, but it stays right here empty for days. She told me in the morning she don't feel the same balance in her bones. Seems to me that when I die, these words will be written on my stone.
That was beautiful. Goodbye. Good night.
Gone,
I got a radio show to do.
One sec. The ground beneath my feet.
You know what that means?
Open wide. Wait, I've been holding
Where's the hook?
with nothing in between.
Bye. Good night. Go. I'll talk to you later. See ya. Of course, my children all know they're not supposed to come in while I'm doing radio, but they do anyway. So I don't remember where I was, what the hell I was talking about. It doesn't matter because it's 23 minutes after the top of the hour and I haven't even hit the topic for tonight. But the reason I was bringing this up, no, I think that was not, Taylor Swift Jr., her. That was the boy band where the guy just died. He fell off a balcony. Anyway, one something. So it shows you how much I know about it. But tonight, I came across some articles and some things that were very interesting. I found a guy that was talking about our ever-changing worship music in church, and that gives us a spiritual amnesia. And I want to talk about that, but that's not the main topic I want to get to tonight. So I don't want to dig into it at all. I was originally going to use that as a basis and talk and say, well, look, this audience, we're not all churchgoers. Not everybody here is Christian. Not everybody here is Jewish. Might have some atheists and agnostics in the mix here. But I wanted to talk about it because he had some very good points to make. But as he was making those points, I got to thinking about what have we seen in politics of late? We see a hell of a lot of people that will quote Jesus. Let's quote Jesus. Here's the graphic for tonight: the Jewish Jesus, and the attempt to really strip him of his Judaism in the modern era. And what about Jesus? I hear all these people that would make quotes about Jesus that we should give to the poor and do this. And yeah, he did say those things. But they forget that his gospel that he taught was not just a social gospel. There was more to it. There was that theological gospel, the gospel of obeying God's commands. I saw somebody, what came to mind was recently I had a conversation with somebody who was talking about Jesus wasn't here preaching the law of Moses or the Ten Commandments. Yeah, he's mentioned them, but he wasn't the one that was there to enforce them. He was teaching a social gospel of helping your neighbor, loving your neighbor as yourself. And somebody quoted that. Jesus said, you should love somebody asked him, one of the Pharisees, What's the greatest commandment of all? And he said to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor. And I said, but that's not all he said. No, they didn't even say that. I'm sorry. What they said in their quote was just to love each other. That was what they said. And I said, well, that's a paraphrase, but that's not really the entirety of what he said. But this is what the new gospel of politics would have you believe about Jesus when they invoke him. That is that he was for all these different social orders. And I said, why don't you go to the passage where you find that little scene where Jesus was asked that question? One of the Pharisees, the ruling class of the religious class of the Jews, asked him, what is the greatest commandment? And he said, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as you love your own bodies. And that was all missed in the quick, well, Jesus said we're supposed to love everybody, so we're supposed to do this. No, Jesus, when he said that, he was talking about you have to love God first. You love God with everything you have. And then he's going to add, and you love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so that was something that really sparked my interest in wanting to look into this a little bit more. Just kind of a stream of consciousness of how I got to where I am for tonight's topic. And I wanted to talk about misusing Jesus and how the church and how politics and how everybody divorces Jesus from Judaism. Now, all of us could probably say historically, we know that he was a Jew. We know he was an Israelite. He was born in the land of Judea, which isn't a form of the word Jew, by the way. And he was of the Jewish religion, the Jewish faith. He was a Jewish person. Michelle Thompson, so what if they don't live themselves? So what if they don't live themselves? Michelle, just restate that for me before I comment. I want to make sure I know what you're talking about there exactly. But the fact that Jesus was a Jew hasn't gone unrecognized. So what if they don't love themselves? I think that I see what you're saying. Jesus said, love your neighbors as you would love your own bodies. What he means is most people are narcissistic, meaning we all take care of ourselves. A narcissism that is not mentally deficient narcissism. It's the narcissism of we take care of ourselves. We wash ourselves. We feed ourselves. We clothe ourselves. Those who don't are usually the standouts. They're the ones that have some issues going on. Basically, what Jesus was saying, without trying to parse and bring 21st century thinking into first century thinking, is he was basically saying, we all love ourselves. We all take care of ourselves. We all feed ourselves. We all clothe ourselves. He says, so you love your neighbor as you love yourself, or as you love your own bodies, is what he was saying. So, and by the way, interpretation of Scripture is pretty easy once you get over the first hurdle, which is understanding what the context would have been at the time somebody was saying something. So, getting to understand why Jesus said the things he said and what he meant when he said them, it's digging into the context of the historical context. Now, libraries and bookstores are replete with volumes that bear all these kinds of titles like Jesus the Jew, the Galilean Jewishness of Jesus, Jesus and the World of Judaism, the Religion of Jesus the Jew, Jesus in his Jewish context, the Jewish Reclamation of Jesus, and 3 volumes and countings of A Marginal Jew. Now, the point is, more than simply this historical observation that Jesus was Jewish. There's numerous churches today that acknowledge their intimate connection to Judaism, connections born from scripture, history, theology, and as the Apostle Paul put it, who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, Christ according to the flesh in the book of Romans, meaning according to his human body, he was Jewish. And so nevertheless, when it comes to the pew, the church pew, the pulpit, the classroom sometimes, even when Christian congregants, ministers, and professors do acknowledge that Jesus was Jewish, they often don't provide any content for the label. The claim that Jesus was a Jew might be historically true, but it's not a central facet to the teaching of the church nowadays. So it doesn't matter much. So the problem is more than one of silence. In the popular Christian imagination, Jesus still remains defined incorrectly and unfortunately as against the law of the Jews, the Deuteronomy, the Levitical law, and all of that. Or at least against how it was understood at the time, as against the temple law as an institution, and not simply against its first century leadership, as against the people Israel, but in favor of the Gentiles type of thing. So Jesus becomes this rebel who, unlike every other Jew, practices social justice, according to the church. He's the only one to speak with women. He's the only one who teaches nonviolent responses to oppression. He's the only one who cares about the poor and the marginalized. And by the way, that phrase has become a litany in some Christian circles. Judaism becomes in such discourse a negative foil for Jesus. So whatever Jesus stands for, Judaism isn't it. And whatever Jesus is against, Judaism epitomizes the category. That's what this thing has become. It's how it's contextually how it's watered down. So this divorcing of Jesus from Judaism does a disservice to each textually, theologically, historically, and ethically. And first, the separation severs the church's connections to the scriptures of Israel, what it calls the Old Testament, because Jesus and his earliest followers were all Jews. They held the Torah and the prophets sacred. They prayed the Psalms. They celebrated the bravery of Esther and the fidelity of Ruth. And to understand Jesus, one has to have a familiarity with the scriptures that shaped who he was. Or, as some people will insist, that he wrote. Now, second, the insistence that Jesus' Jewish identity reinforces some belief that he was fully human, anchored in historical time and place. That this connection is known as the scandal of particularity. Not only does the church proclaim that the divine took on human form, it also proclaims that it took on this form in a particular setting amongst a particular people, that there was purpose behind it. There was divine intent for when this happened. Now, mind you, folks, I am talking Christian theology here a bit. So if you're not Christian or you don't know any of this stuff, don't worry about it. Just go along with what we're talking about. I'll try to explain it as we go. So the church doesn't just say that Jesus was God, very God, in human form. It says it also proclaims that he took on this human form as the divine at a particular setting, at a particular place, amongst a particular people. Now, the church claims that the divinity took on her human flesh. It was incarnated in Jesus of Nazareth. Therefore, the time and the place matter. Christianity follows Jesus of Nazareth, not Jesus of Cleveland or Jesus of Mexico City. The incarnation dates to the 1st century, not the 21st. So further, the Jewish tradition into which Jesus was born and the Christian tradition that developed in his name were historical religions. That is, their foundational events took place in history and on earth rather than in some mythic time and mythic place. They have a starting point and a vision for the future. So to disregard history, to disregard time and place, is to be unfaithful to both Judaism and Christianity. Okay, I'm laying down an apologetic here. Follow with me. So, historically, Jesus should be seen as continuous with the line of Jewish teachers and prophets, for he shares with them a particular view of the world and a particular manner of expressing that view. Like Amos, one of the minor prophets, and Isaiah, Hosea, Jeremiah, all these prophets from the Old Testament. Jesus used arresting speech. He risked political persecution. He turned traditional family values upside down in order to proclaim what he believed God wants. The Torah teaches, and Israel must do. So this historical anchoring, it doesn't need to, nor should it, in Christian teaching, preclude or overshadow Jesus' role in the divine plan. He must, in the Christian tradition, be more than just a really fine Jewish teacher, but he must be that Jewish teacher as well. Further, Jesus had to have made sense in his own context, and his context is that of Galilee and Judea. Jesus can't be understood fully unless he is understood through 1st century Jewish eyes and heard through 1st century Jewish ears. The parables that he spoke are products of 1st century Jewish culture, not ours. The healings were assessed according to that worldview, not ours. The debates of how to follow Torah took place within that set of legal parameters and forms of discourse, not ours. To understand Jesus' impact in his own setting, why some chose to follow him and others to dismiss him and still others to seek his death, requires an understanding of that contextual setting. If we today have difficulty fathoming how our grandparents could function without the internet and cell phones, let alone without television, how can we possibly presume to understand the worldview of Jesus and his contemporaries of 2,000 years ago without asking a few historical questions? When Jesus is located within the world of Judaism, the ethical implications of his teachings take on renewed and heightened meaning. Their power is restored. Their challenge is sharpened. Jews as well as Christians should be able to agree on a number of these teachings today, just as in the 1st century Jesus followers. And even those Jews who chose not to follow him would have agreed with such basic assertions as that God is our Father, that God's name should be hallowed, and that the divine kingdom is something ardently to be desired. Jesus doesn't have to be unique in all these cases in order to be profound. JPS, this is why understanding historical context is so important. So spot on, Brother JP. Historical context is paramount to understanding who Jesus is, what he taught, what the Bible is, what the Bible teaches, what the Apostle Paul was writing about. Yes, there are some timeless principles that are out there, but understanding these people and why they did what they did and how they did what they did, what motivated them, you have to remove yourself to the context. First of all, I've always said, when reading Old Testament scripture or any ancient text, especially theologically in the Bible, you have to look at not only the context of when it was written, the when, the why, the how. You have to understand the context of what the people to whom it was written would have understood in their context, in that context of that day. It's paramount to most things, from politics to economics to religion to war, says JP. He's absolutely right. So Jesus' connection to Judaism can be seen not only in his general comments about Torah. By the way, Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the Torah, the books of Moses. His general comments about Torah were how you could see that he had his connection to Judaism, but also in his practice of its commandments. For example, Jesus dresses like a Jew. Did you know that? No, we don't have any pictures. But how do we know Jesus dressed like a Jew contextually? Well, first of all, we know he was a Jew contextually in the 1st century AD. Contextually in Judea, of Nazareth, living in and around Galilee and Jerusalem. Specifically, Jesus wore, there's a Jewish word, the tzitzit. It's T-Z-I-T. You could say zizi. It's the fringes, which the book of Numbers, out of the Torah, enjoins on all Israelite men, which a number of Orthodox Jewish men still wear today, and which can be seen today most readily in the tallit, or the prayer shawl, worn in the synagogues during worship. I had mentioned that once before, not long ago, when I was with a company, we traveled and visited clients in New York. And it was a photography shop right down in Times Square, still there to this day, owned by a Jewish family, and they were all dressed, the men, black pants, a black vest, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, yarmulke, and they had on the prayer shawls underneath their vest because they were working. It wasn't draped over their head, but they had all these tassels that were hanging down. That's the tzitzit. Those are the fringes that you find in the book of Numbers, which is part of the Torah. Numbers 15:37 through 40 reads, "The Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and tell them to make fringes on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue cord on the fringe at each corner. You have the fringe so that when you see it, you will remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them, and not follow the lust of your own heart and your own eyes. So you shall remember and do all my commandments, and you shall be holy to your God." So these tzitzit, these fringes that were put on the prayer shawls, might be compared to something like the WWJD bracelets, for those who wear them genuinely. Just as the bracelets remind Christians, evangelicals mostly, you see, wearers to ask, what would Jesus do? So the fringes were there to remind Jewish wearers of all 613 commandments, or the mitzvot. In Hebrew, the singular, the mitzvah. And did you know there weren't just 10 commandments? There's 613 of them. And so the Gospels don't shy away from the fact that Jesus wore these fringes. It was these fringes that the woman with the 12-year hemorrhage affliction touched in hopes of being healed, according to the account in Matthew. Do you remember this account of Jesus? Mark 6:56 says, "And wherever he went, into the villages or the cities or the farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringes of his cloak. And all who touched it were healed." And the fact that Jesus, according to Matthew 23:5, criticized the Pharisees and the scribes because they, quote, make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long, suggests that his phylacteries were narrow and his fringes shorter. Now, do you know what a phylactery was? It was the little square box that would be placed on the forehead, sometimes on the arm. They would strap that with leather straps, and this was the prayer box. And the leather straps around the arm with the little box. They were reminders. They were places for prayers. The phylacteries, and then the fringes, the tzitzit, were reminders of the commandments, just like WWJD. So Jesus doesn't dismiss the Torah. To use modern idiom, he actually wore it on his sleeve. That's where you found it. Now, something very interesting, by the way, anecdotally, off to the side, and aside, a sidebar. Some of the studies they've been doing of the Shroud of Turin, whether you believe it's really Jesus or not. I don't know if it was really Jesus, but it sure seems like it. They have now found embedded in the imagery things, they keep finding things in there. In the imagery with the more modern technology of looking into it, they actually found that his arms of the man in the shroud were wrapped with the leather straps of the prayer of the phylacteries. The little boxes found, it had drooped from. I don't know if those were placed on his body afterwards or if they were on his body when this man was crucified. We don't know for sure, but that's an aside. That's a neat aside. So the reminder of the fringes has this really practical payoff for Christians. The Gospel's preservation of this detail indicates that the Old Testament must be acknowledged as more than just an anticipation of the coming of the Messiah, but as more than a book that can now be discarded or more respectfully put on the shelf next to the other antiquities, to be admired but not used. But by preserving the fact that Jesus wore fringes, the New Testament mandates that respect for Jewish custom be maintained and that Jesus' own Jewish practices be honored, even by the Gentile church, which doesn't follow those old customs. So Jesus dressed like a Jew. Not only did Jesus dress like a Jew, he ate like a Jew as well. He kept kosher. That is, he kept the dietary requirements that were established in the Torah. In the book of Leviticus, it's explicit about what animals are permitted for human consumption. It says any animal that has divided hooves, cloven-footed or cleft-footed, and chews the cud is good to eat. Thus, the pig, the camel, the rock badger, the hare are not kosher. Jesus would have not consumed a ham sandwich, nor, by the way, would the occasion often have presented itself. Archaeological investigation finds few pig bones in Galilee because they didn't use them. It was against the law to eat them. They were considered the unclean animals. So the only contact Jesus had with pigs is described in the most complete form in Mark, the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, 1 through 20. Van says, respectfully, if Jesus could forgive sins before he was crucified, then why the need for the crucifixion? That is a good question, Van. I don't have my glasses on. It's blurring the O and the. I was thinking, am I saying Van or Von? And I've seen you before, so I know. So I believe that that because he was God, very God, according to Scripture, he had that ability to forgive sins. But that the forgiveness of mankind was an atoning act, and that was the crucifixion. I used to, there was a line of reasoning, be it faulted or not, that I used to give when talking with people about this very thing back in my day in ministry was that, hey, if we could earn, people would say, well, I'm getting to heaven because I do good works. And I said, if we can earn our salvation, why did Jesus have to die? Same kind of questioning, Van. I get that. I believe it was because he was able to tap into God the Father. And I do believe that there's a point where Jesus, I don't think, knew right away who he was, the divine. I think he always had something special about him. I think he had to grow into the understanding of who he was. And that's a totally different topic. We could spend a long time talking about that. That is a good question, but I hope I answered that satisfactorily in the brief. Is that not in my briefs, but in the brief that because he was God become flesh, that he could tap into that power of God. And this was supposed to be where the healing came from as well. But that when he died on the cross, or the substitutionary death, the Lamb of God, when that happened, he became the propitiation for sin, and it covered the sin of mankind. He was like, what do they call him? The second Adam, where the first Adam brought sin into the world, the second took it away. Why couldn't he have forgiven all sins by speaking it into existence? Yeah, it baffles me too. He was always God, right? Yeah. Those are baffling questions. I get baffled with those questions, Van. We've talked about those before. Let me get back into this topic. We can talk about this if you're still stuck around here when I get through tonight's material, or we'll do another show about that because those are serious, important questions. I have dealt with them. I've talked about them here, and I want to do fairness and say we can talk about this more to greater extent. He could have spoken it into existence, but giving it by just simply speaking it into existence wipes out the free will that he gives mankind. I mean, it's paradoxical, the whole thing. We'll talk about that. Be patient with me. We'll get to that another time. So following in Mark 5, Jesus casts the demon out of the man. It was actually two men, it says. The possessed man and the demoniac of the Gadarenes, the men of the tombs. And Jesus asked his name. He says, "We are Legion." And he casts Legion out into, where will he go? And they go into a herd of pigs, and the pigs run off the cliff and into the water. Now, by the way, as another aside, an historical aside, JP, you'll appreciate this maybe. The historical context of that. They think the Gadarenes, where this took place, where Jesus and the disciples got out of the boat onto the shore, was somewhere along the Sea of Galilee, in the region of Galilee in Israel. But why would there be a herd of pigs on a farmstead on the shores of Galilee? Nobody in Galilee raised pigs. So there was a big question. Where were they really? If you look at, we talked about this once before, I might revive the topic again. Shimka Yakubovici talked about the naked archaeologist. He talked about how he believes the Gadarenes, there's another place called Gadara, but it's over closer to the Pillars of Hercules, the Straits of Gibraltar in what is now southern Spain, the Mediterranean side. And he believes that this boat voyage was one that they took along or through the Mediterranean and ended up there. And that this was where the Gadarenes was. And there's several ancient cemeteries, thousands of years old, along the cliffs and the hillsides of certain parts of the Mediterranean in the Gadarenes. And there's a little town there that still to this day, they're Christian, but they are Christian. They hail their roots back this little town. They can trace their heritage, many of them, way back. Little tiny town that says Jesus visited their town. And that's how they became Christian, that he visited their town during his lifetime near the Gadarenes, and that whole story is linked to that town. So it's an interesting story, and we'll cover that, and maybe we'll do that again sometime because it's a really great story. But following their expulsion from this severely possessed man, a group of demons so numerous that their former host identified himself as Legion, for we are many, requested that Jesus send them into a herd of swine. Jesus agreed, and the unclean spirits came out, entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, it says in the story, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. Mark's narrative anticipates the mission to the Gentiles. For the city of Gerasa, where the story is set, was part of the Decapolis, a league of 10 predominantly Gentile cities, and the presence of the pigs is a less than subtle clue to the non-Jewish composition of the population. So the story also allows a political dig against Rome, given that the unclean spirits identified themselves as legion, the Latin term for an army cohort, Roman army cohort. But as for Jesus' Jewish identity, neither he nor his Jewish associates would have mourned the loss of a herd of hogs, animals that are not kosher and that represent conspicuous consumption in that they cost more to raise than they produce in meat. Now, I also always wondered, well, the guy who owned those pigs, who was going to pay for 2,000 pigs that got killed? Was Jesus responsible for that, or was it the demons? It's the demons, not me. I don't know. We don't know the fallout of that story, but there it was. So, a critically aware, historically informed study of Jesus is also crucial to prevent the anti-Semitism that tends to arise when the history is not known. The concern to recover Jesus' Jewishness is particularly urgent these days in churches, in academies, and pronouncements made by Mexican Americans, by Palestinians, by women from Benin, women from Korea, the World Council of Churches, the Catholic Liberation theologians. Jesus' Jewishness is frequently erased, as Jesus continues to be the symbol for all that is socially good. Many Christians depict his Jewish background as the epitome of all that was wrong with the world. So if Jesus preaches good news to the poor, so the common impression goes, the Jews must be preaching good news to the rich. If Jesus welcomes sinners, the Jews must have pushed them away. If Jesus speaks or heals women, the Jews must have set up a patriarchal society that makes the Taliban look progressive. These are all the assumptions that have been made over the centuries about Jesus and his Jewishness. In the academy, certain schools of thought have managed to distinguish Jesus, whether implicitly or explicitly, from any sort of Judaism. The popular push to depict Jesus as a Galilean and see Galilee as religiously and ethnically distinct from Judea winds up conveying the impression that Judaism, with its temple and its leadership way down there in Jerusalem, is quite distinct from the Galilean Jesus. The popular image of Jesus as this peasant itinerant teacher often serves not to connect him to his fellow Jews, but to distinguish him from them, since the Jews remained in the popular imagination not peasants, but Pharisees and Sadducees, or in academic terms, members of the retainer and the elite class. Worse, the lingering view that Jesus dismissed basic Jewish practices, such as the laws concerning the Sabbath. Remember, they were eating corn. They plucked corn and ate it because they were hungry out of a field on the Sabbath, which, by the way, was not breaking law. They weren't stealing it. There was supposed to be a portion of fields where the crops were left for the poor or for those who were hungry. And so they say he didn't observe the Sabbath, his ritual purity. Jesus turns away from his Jewish identity, and this makes him into a liberal Protestant, according to some trains of thought. So another case of divorcing Jesus from Judaism arises in the case of liberation theology, that form of religious thought that proclaims that God has a preferential option for the poor. And seeking to put biblical pronouncement in service to political and economic ends, Jesus is the pedagogue of the oppressed, the redeemer of the underclass, and the hero of the masses. According to liberals, Van, he was. According to the liberals, he was. Now, we're going to get into this. Pay attention here. We're going to get into this a little bit more. The problem isn't the use of Jesus for political ends. The biblical material has always been and should continue to be used to promote a more just society. The problem is that the language of liberation all too often veers off into anti-Jewish rants. We're talking liberation theology, by the way. A thing. Jesus becomes the Palestinian martyr, crucified once again by the Jews. He is the one killed by the patriarchal God of Judaism. He breaks down the barriers that Judaism erects between Jew and Gentile, rich and poor, male and female, slave and free. And so he can liberate all today. And liberate all today. Emphasis on the right word. The intent is well-meaning, but the history is dreadful. And the impression given of Judaism is absolutely obscene in this liberation theology. The poison is there in the founding documents of liberation theology. One of the fathers of the movement, Gustavo Gutierrez, states in A Theology of Libertarian that he wrote way back in 1973, an Orbis Books publication, that the infidelites of the Jewish people made the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, invalid. Leonardo Boff writes in Passions of Christ, Passions of the World, another Orbis publication. In the world as Jesus found it, human beings were under the yoke of absolutization of religion, of tradition, and of the law. Religion was no longer the way in which human beings expressed their own openness to God. It had crystallized and stagnated in a world of its own, a world of rites and sacrifice. Pharisees had moral conception of their God. A morbid conception of their God. Now, Jesus wasn't a capitalist, but Jesus spent most of his life as a carpenter and a stonemason. So before he launched into his ministry. Was he a capitalist? What did he say? Remember the whole thing with the coin? The Pharisees trying to trick him in the crowd. Asked him about if they should pay taxes to Caesar. And he said, "Who has a coin?" He says, "Toss me your coin." He holds it up. He says, "Whose image is on this coin?" And the Pharisee said, "Why, Caesar's." Jesus tosses the coin back. He says, "Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God." I don't think Jesus was anti-capitalist. I also don't think he was liberal or conservative. Jesus was there for a purpose, and he was fulfilling a purpose. Was he a capitalist? Not himself. Did he decry capitalism? No. He decried oppression. So let's move on from that. Now, all of this rhetoric should sound familiar. It echoes standard New Testament scholarship of the 1970s. Professor Bauer and I would recognize this because we were in seminary in the late 70s and early 80s. Yet these works, classics in their field, are still being assigned to students of theology and still being read across the globe. In their wake comes anti-Judaism. I've seen some of these works. I've read them. I had recommended them earlier on to some people in my studies because there was a lot of value in what some of these people had to say. And I wouldn't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But sadly, when I look at all the teachings in those books, whether they have any critique of the theology itself, not everybody will notice the anti-Jewish rhetoric. So, and it took me a long time before I did. Now, these anti-Jewish obscenities are still produced by those who know better. The presses that publish such materials, the World Council of Churches, their press in Geneva, Fortress Press, which is connected to the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, the Catholic Mary Knoll, Orbis Books, and so on, are all affiliated with groups that have splendid statements on Jewish-Christian relations. But the evil of anti-Jewish biblical and theological interpretation is so pernicious, so omnipresent in those works, that it affects even those who seek its eradication. Just as racism and sexism, the host of other human sins, affects everybody to one extent or another, so too anti-Judaism is promoted even by the best of institutions, the most progressive of theologians, and the most sensitive of those who work for justice and peace. The old Western feminist argument that Jesus redeems women from Judaism and eliminates Jewish taboos that create outcasts takes on particularly ugly form in WCC, World Council of Church publications. For example, in 1995, there was an essay, Challenges for Feminist Theology in Francophone Africa. And Marguerite Thessenot was identified as the president of the Union of Methodist Women of Benin and a member of the World Council of Churches Commission on Faith and Order. She states, 2,000 years ago, Jesus gave women their rightful place despite the heavy yoke of Jewish culture weighing on them. For women in general and Jewish women in particular, the coming of Jesus meant a revolution, end quote. And she goes on to insist that being a Christian cannot mean relinquishing our culture. We must remain genuinely African, she said, while still being good Christian men and women. Now, similarly, Ruth Bisha, a former professor of linguistics at the University of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, she wrote in A Life of Endless Struggle, The Position of Women in Africa, that Christ never compromised with injustice and acted and spoke against the oppression of women in traditional Jewish society. In a collection from 1986, New Eyes for Reading, Biblical and Theological Reflections by Women from the Third World, Grace Eneme, a Presbyterian representative of the Federation of Protestant Churches in Cameroon, writes, Christ was the only rabbi who did not discriminate against the women of his time. And in this same volume, Bet Ikeya, a Kenyan Roman Catholic, states, in his own relationship with women, he, Jesus, chose to ignore the traditional Jewish attitudes and instead treated women with compassion and complete acceptance, end quote. So phrases such as the heavy yoke of Jewish culture presume that for women, Judaism was oppressive and repressive and suppressive. Now, the argument follows from the Western Academy's early feminist steps. It doesn't follow, however, from the Bible itself, in which the New Testament records numerous rights that Jewish women had in the first century. Home ownership, patronage positions, access to their own funds, the rights to worship in synagogues and in temple, freedom of travel, and so forth. Women didn't join Jesus because Judaism treated them poorly, nor did they stop being Jews any more than Jesus himself once they joined. And by the way, if you go to the New Testament teachings of Paul, it says a woman should remain covered in church and speak only to her husband. Those were Paul's opinions. That was not scripture based on Torah. That was not scripture based on Judaism. and on the teachings or the culture of the day. Now, the most common Gospels text cited to prove Jesus' anomalous views of women is the account of the hemorrhaging woman and the framing narrative of the dead girl, which appear in all three synoptic Gospels. Matthew's version begins as Jesus' teaching. Suddenly a ruler, quote unquote, Matthew and Mark's source specifically identifies a man as Jairus, a synagogue ruler, came in and knelt before Jesus saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her and she will live." Matthew intensifies the situation. For in Mark's version, the girl is only ill. Matthew says he says she's dead. Jesus got up and followed Jairus with his disciples. Then, interrupting his story of the dead girl, Matthew recounts that a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak, the tzitzit of his cloak, in hopes of receiving a healing. Jesus turns and sees the woman, and he says, "Take heart, daughter. Your faith has made you well." Matthew provides the happy announcement, and instantly the woman was made well. And resuming the story of the desperate father and the dead daughter, the narrative picks up again with the notice that when Jesus came to the leader's house, saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And the passage says, and they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, Jesus went in, took her by the hand. Remember the words he spoke, Talitha Kumi, in Aramaic. And the girl got up. And the report of this spread throughout the whole district. Now, Christian feminists tend to love this story, for selectively interpreted, it plays perfectly into the argument that Jesus rejected any kind of religious practice that would keep women from being equal to men. And the problem with the argument is that it rests on faulty historical contextual reasoning. And bad history cannot lead to good theology. And although no version of the story cites Leviticus, mentions impurity, expresses surprise at a bleeding woman in public, finds odd Jesus is touching a corpse, or portrays Jesus as abrogating any law, New Testament scholars import all this into the story and more. For example, Teresa Okure writes of the woman's courage in breaking with crippling cultural taboos placed on her so as to reach Jesus directly and be fully restored and integrated as a person with full rights in her society. So the inevitable conclusion of this reading, in its practical payoff for women in the church today, to continue to exclude women from certain Christian ministries on the basis of outmoded Jewish taboos, is to render null and void the liberation that Jesus won for us. Like Teresa Okure. Women in the Bible was her essay. Now, the term taboo is already fully loaded. Crippling cultural taboos, she had said. Much more so. Now, both terms are unwarranted. They aren't even found in the text of the passage. There's no reason why the woman would not be in public, and no reason why she should not seek Jesus' help. No crowd parts before her with the cry, get away, there's a hemorrhaging woman." No authorities restrict her to her house or require her to proclaim herself unclean, unclean. Finally, Jesus abrogates no laws concerning any crippling cultural taboos, for there's no law forbidding the woman to touch him or to touch her. Another problem arises when forms of Palestinian liberation theology appropriate Jesus for political ends. This is more recent. We've seen some of this. Any writing that separates Jesus and his first followers from Jewish identity associates these proto-Christians with the Palestinian population and reserves the label Jew for those who crucified Jesus only and persecuted the church, and is not historically untenable, but theologically abhorrent. A few comments from Naim Atik, an Anglican priest and founder of the Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center in Jerusalem, are indicative of this rhetoric. At Notre Dame in 2001, Atik preached on the Zionist ideology of domination versus the reign of God. And he identified Jesus Christ living in our country as a Palestinian under occupation, and declared that Israel has placed a large boulder, a big stone that has metaphorically shut off the Palestinians in a tomb. It is similar to the stone placed on the entrance of Jesus' tomb, he says. That same year, for his Easter message, Atik proclaimed, "In this season of Lent, it seems to many of us that Jesus is on the cross again with thousands of crucified Palestinians around him. The Israeli government crucifixion system is operating daily," he said. So at a worship service in Jerusalem in April of 2002, he stated, the same guy, Atik, stated, "Palestinians have been condemned as a nation by Israel and sentenced to destruction. The accusations of people in power are strikingly similar throughout history to the charges leveled against Jesus in this city: terrorist, evildoer, or rebel, and a subversive person. Palestinians," he said, "are being crucified today for refusing to succumb to Israel's demand for greater concession on the land." End quote. The rhetoric is absolutely, unabashedly overblown. Jesus did not advise his followers to blow up the Romans. And Atik is not advising his followers to blow up Jews, but by lumping all Palestinians into one category, he risks that impression. Now, Palestinians haven't been sentenced to destruction by the Jews, by Israel. Atik is hardly silenced in his day. On the contrary, he continued to hold international conferences at his center and give talks and sermons at Notre Dame, the Center for Jewish-Christian Relations at Cambridge University, the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago, and elsewhere. Atik's rhetoric is also really slimily slippery, since its anti-Jewish impact is often more of a matter of perception. For a convocation at the Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Atik preached concerning Jesus' messages. They, quote, "reflect an inclusive commitment to one's fellow humanity and a ministry that has depth and breadth of scope, a commitment to the poor, a commitment to the ministry of healing, a commitment to justice and liberation of the oppressed, a commitment to jubilee, which invokes economic justice for all. I believe that these words constituted a paradigm shift at the time of Jesus, and they provide us with the basis of a paradigm shift for ministry in the 21st century. In making this claim, he erases Jesus' Judaism. If concern for the poor originated with Jesus, then the church might follow that ancient heretic Marcion and jettison the whole entire Old Testament. Marcion. I could get into him, but I'm not going to. Trust me, Marcion. He was one that said that the Jewish law really was not pertinent to understanding the salvific nature of Jesus. So, in the respected series, Reading from This Place, Atik's article begins with the standard and false view that Judaism is particularistic and Christianity is universal. He said membership was no longer seen as confined to one ethnic group of people, but rather in terms of a renewed covenant that included people of all races and ethnic backgrounds. So given his social location, it becomes both particularly pernicious and particularly ironic. Israeli citizens are by no means just one ethnic group, just of one ethnic group. On the contrary, Israel today is the most multi-ethnic and indeed multicultural state in the Middle East. The article of Ethiques then focuses on John 20, an account describing how the followers of Jesus hid for fear of the Jews. Now, in this piece, the Jews seeking the lives of Jesus' followers become the Israeli army in current day. Atik goes on to compare the Intifada to Pentecost, the descent of the Holy Spirit on Christians. So needless to say, the series doesn't include a piece by an Israeli Jew describing how Lamentations, the book, is understood by parents in Jerusalem or by Netanyahu, whose children are killed by Palestinians. So the point of all this is not to play this obscene game of who is most victimized, and it's not to dismiss the legitimate claims of the Palestinian people, which there are some, by the way. I believe there are some legitimate claims by the Palestinians. Nor am I arguing that there's no comparably ugly rhetoric on the part of those who would oppose the Palestinian state to a certain degree. My point is that any prejudicial commentary that divorces Jesus from Judaism and then uses the story of Jesus to condemn all Jews, it's not a Christian message. It's not a message founded in Christianity. It is rather a recycled anti-Judaism that depicts Israel as a country of Christ killers. The goal of Palestinian statehood, some might say, is laudable, that it's a good thing to want to form a state of their own. But these particular means of achieving it are not. And that was the whole point of what I was driving at with this tonight, is that to try to take Jesus and divorce him from Judaism is appalling. It's not historically accurate. It's not contextually accurate. It's not theologically accurate. So, hopefully, you got some good material out of that. Let's do this. Let's take a break for a minute or two. Come back for the captain's cabin. For a little bit. It's 10:24. 11:24 if you're out east. 8:24 if you're out west. 9:24 if you're in between. So let's go out for a little bit of a break. Just a short one. We'll be right back. We'll do a captain's cabin. And if you want to call in and talk about these things, this would be the time that we could do that. So everyone, if you've got to leave us after this portion of the show, we'll see you next time. And those of you who are sticking around, stay in your seat, stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Everyone, live long and prosper.
The Intrepid Radio Program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hi, my dad. So he can take me to Disneyland.
Dave, I love you, brother.
I miss you too.
I miss you too, I heard.
Yep,
Did you guys hear that?
I heard that.
I miss you, Dave. And welcome to the captain's cabin, you lubbers. Good to have you back. If you haven't left, thank you for sticking around. We don't have a whole lot really left to the show. We've got a little bit of time here to do a little after show. This is the after show. This is the informal part. This is the part where you can kick off your shoes now, light up, and crack a beer and sit back. And if you want to call and talk about anything, we can do that. Otherwise, we're just, this is the non-show part of the show. So if you dubbed the captain's cabin by all of you many moons ago. So what do you think of all that? Now, I'm not here to preach a message of Christ or Christianity. But I think it's, I am one that hasn't thrown out the baby with the bathwater. I don't disbelieve. I just believe very differently than I did a long time ago. And some of you may have some of the same questions and things that I deal with. So I hope that you enjoyed that little romp into looking at some contextual forms of Jesus, looking especially at the fact that nowadays people try to socialize Jesus, saying that his message is one of social gospel, his message is one of liberal, progressive socialism, if you were to put it in modern day clothing, when it's really not. And they try to strip away his Judaism. and not overtly, subtly. And they forget who he was and what he was. So again, like JP and I talked about toward the very beginning of the show, of the presentation, is that context means everything when you talk about these things. There's a context to who Jesus is. There's a context to understanding the message he taught, the books he was written about in. You have to go back to understanding what the context of the day was and understanding what the people to whom those texts were written were going to understand within their context, within that historical context of the whole picture. So there you go. There it is. Hopefully that wasn't too word salady for you. So how about that Trump team? How about all the appointments that he's putting in place, nominations, they all have to be voted on. There's no reason they shouldn't be voted on. Even the ones that are controversial, I don't think are any controversy. So, what are your thoughts on how that all is going? We got a few minutes here tonight, so if you want to call in, you can. If you don't have to. It's okay. I appreciate everybody who's here. I'm gonna take a drink. So, by the way, I didn't put it up tonight. There's my banner that scrolls. If you want to go over to my Etsy page, you can find some good merch and a product. There it is, etsy.com/shop/son-of-a-patriot. That's my page. You can come on over. What do you like most of, Sean Stroik? I like most, almost all. I missed something early on. Not sure what you're referring to there. I said, good evening, Bauer Media, but I don't see it now. Oh. Beats the heck out of me. So, there you go. Got my Star Trek shirt on. See? Star Trek. Oh, I'm going behind the mic. There it is. I got some new shirts out. If you go over to my Etsy page, if you want to order them, we'll print them right here for you. So, well, you know what? It's all I got for tonight. I'm done. So, since we got nobody calling in right now, I'm gonna take my leave of you. So, all of you, you have a good night. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of the show, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks for coming by. So, again, live long and prosper.